Today, we need to address a really sensitive topic, the tragic death of Olivia Wood.
Yes, and our aim today was to try and understand, what we could learn about her final hours, the circumstances, based on the reports we have.
It's crucial we approach this with care, really focusing only on what the material allows.
Absolutely. Sticking to the facts we actually possess.
Right. Usually for these deep dives, we'd have, well, a range of sources, articles, maybe some official notes, that kind of thing, enough to piece together a picture.
Material that lets you really dig in.
Exactly. But in this specific case, we're looking at just one document. And frankly, it offers basically no useful information about Olivia Wood's case. Not the one described to us, anyway.
That's right. The document, well, it exists, but it sadly contains no meaningful details at all, no real facts, no analysis, nothing that sheds light on the specifics of this tragedy.
Okay, so let's be upfront about this. This obviously creates a pretty big problem for the deep dive we had planned.
A major hurdle, yeah.
We wanted to explore Olivia Wood's final hours, based on that initial description we had suggesting, a harmful relationship, a tragic outcome.
A specific narrative was implied.
But with just nothing usable in our source material. We simply can't get into those specifics today. It wouldn't be right.
Precisely. Our whole process relies on looking at reliable information, synthesizing it. Without that foundation, talking about the specifics of Olivia Wood's case would be just guesswork.
Pure speculation.
Yeah.
And totally inappropriate given the sensitivity.
Exactly.
So here's the interesting part, maybe, the lack of information. That kind of becomes the focus itself now.
Right.
We can't explore the tragic details we thought we might, but this whole situation really highlights something critical.
Which is?
The absolute need for dependable, reliable sources when you're trying to understand complex, often very upsetting events.
Indeed. When you're dealing with something as serious as a young woman's death, especially when the background hints at things like domestic violence, well, having accurate, trustworthy information is just paramount. Otherwise, you risk spreading misinformation, maybe causing more pain, and you certainly don't grasp the real issues properly.
So what does this mean for our discussion right now? It means we have to shift our focus, really.
Okay.
Instead of trying to dissect Olivia Wood's final hours, which, again, our source gives us zero basis for, we need to talk about why having verifiable information is so vital to begin with. The silence in this document, it's telling, isn't it?
That's a really important point. The absence of information here, it says a lot about the difficulties, the challenge of understanding these events when good reporting is missing or just incomplete. It really underscores the need for thorough investigation, for transparent communication if we want any real understanding.
Okay, so as we start to wrap this up, let's just reiterate the significant limitations we hit today.
Yeah, absolutely.
We intended to explore the specifics of Olivia Wood's case, but the complete lack of any substantive info in our source made that impossible.
And this situation just really hammers home the essential role of credible information. You need it for any meaningful discussion, especially on sensitive topics. Things like potential domestic violence, criminal investigations, the kind of things suggested in the initial description we had.
That initial description, it painted a picture, didn't it? A young woman wanting a fresh start, escaping a difficult situation, ending tragically.
It did.
And even though we couldn't get into the specifics we'd hoped for, it does make you think, more broadly perhaps.
About what?
Just about how complex relationships can be. How sometimes what you see on the surface, well, it can hide realities that are incredibly difficult, even painful, things hidden from view.
That's a profound thought, and it raises a vital question for you listening. How do you navigate these situations where information is thin, maybe unreliable, definitely emotionally charged?
Especially with tough subjects like this.
Right. It really reinforces the need for critical thinking, doesn't it? Thinking hard about the information you see, where it comes from, and always trying to rely on trustworthy sources that actually prioritize accuracy and report responsibly.
Today we're looking closely at a really troubling situation involving Olivia and Kieran Goodwin. We've got court papers, text messages obtained by the BBC.
Right.
And we're trying to unpack what these sources tell us about their relationship.
And what jumps out almost immediately is, well, a disturbing dynamic. Looks like control and definitely financial exploitation.
Yeah, the records show Olivia sent Goodwin, nearly $8,000?
Around $7,900, yeah. Over a pretty short period, too.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the reason suggested is, well, it's grim.
The sources point strongly towards it funding Goodwin's cocaine use, a large chunk of it anyway.
And the texts seem to back that up.
Oh, absolutely. They detail frequent purchases, sometimes daily buys.
Daily? Wow.
Yeah. And there are mentions of him sending Olivia to actually pick up the drugs for him.
So it paints this picture of, like, significant substance abuse right at the heart of things.
Exactly. And it connects to other difficult parts.
Like the control aspect you mentioned.
Precisely. Beyond the money, the court papers and texts, they allege he pressured Olivia.
Pressured her how?
To use drugs herself, perform sexual acts on video,
Oh, wow.
and even apparently coerced her into sleeping with another man.
That sounds like classic coercive control.
It really does fit the pattern. You know, using intimidation, maybe isolation, exploitation. It all seems to be there.
And the financial dependency fueled by the alleged drug use probably played a big role in that control, didn't it?
It often does. It creates this leverage, this imbalance of power. It's quite stark here.
The sources also give us a bit of insight into Olivia's situation near the end. There's something about her calling her job.
Right. She called work, said she needed time off, cited Goodwin's mental state. Apparently it was getting worse, mentioned he was having suicidal thoughts.
Gosh, so she was clearly under immense stress trying to manage that.
Definitely sounds like it. That call, it feels like a sign maybe that she saw how serious things were getting.
And then things shifted, didn't they? She decided to leave.
That's what the prosecutors say. They found her bags packed. She'd made the decision.
Packed bags.
That's
incredibly sad. It's so close to getting out.
It makes what happened next even more heartbreaking. She never left.
No. Instead,
On July 30th, 2024, it was Goodwin who called the police.
saying what?
Saying Olivia wasn't breathing.
And she was taken to the hospital.
Yes, but unfortunately she died later.
Okay, let's just quickly recap what these sources seem to show us.
Sure.
We see this major financial element, nearly $8,000 going from Olivia to Goodwin, allegedly for cocaine.
Mm-hmm. Tied into that, serious allegations of coercive control, pressure about drugs, sex acts, that kind of thing.
And then this really tragic ending, right when she had decided to leave, packed her bags. She dies.
It's a deeply disturbing picture these documents paint, isn't it? Control, alleged addiction, and just a devastating outcome.
Yeah. So as you think about what we've discussed, looking at these difficult sources, maybe consider the complexities in relationships like this. What forms can that control take? Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes maybe less so.
Right. What are those perhaps more subtle signs we should all be aware of? They were looking into some really difficult details surrounding Olivia's death and the subsequent arrest of Goodwin.
Yeah, we've been going through the news reports trying to piece together what happened.
Exactly. Our aim here is to, lay out the key facts as reported and understand the disturbing patterns that seem to be emerging.
And the first thing that jumps out really are the autopsy findings. They're quite stark.
What did they show?
Reports say she had a near-fatal level of cocaine in her system, and also clear marks indicating strangulation.
Wow. Okay, so a really violent end.
It certainly paints that picture, yes.
And Goodwin was arrested pretty quickly, charged with murder. But there was something else the prosecutors mentioned, wasn't there, about his phone?
That's right. They claimed that while he was actually talking to the police, he was apparently deleting data. Hundreds of photos and videos, reportedly.
While talking to the police.
Yeah. It definitely raises questions. What was on there? Why delete it right then?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? And didn't the BBC report something the medics saw as well?
Mm-hmm. They mentioned that the paramedics noticed a significant bruise on Olivia's neck, which lines up with the strangulation finding.
Okay. And then there were his alleged words to the medics. That seemed pretty damning.
Extremely. Reports quote him saying things like, "I killed her, it's my fault," and "Oh God, will she die? What have I done?" It's just, yeah.
Powerful words, especially with everything else we know.
Absolutely.
Okay, but this isn't just about the immediate events, is it? There's more context emerging in court.
Right. This is where it gets particularly concerning. Testimony from several other women about their own experiences with Goodwin.
And they're seeing similarities.
Striking similarities. They're describing a consistent pattern, which is, well, it's alarming.
What kind of pattern?
It often started, they said, with this really intense affection. Very fast, very strong, almost too much love right at the beginning.
Like love bombing.
Kind of, yeah. But then that apparently shifted into controlling behavior later on.
Okay, so intense start, then control. What else?
A really disturbing element mentioned was the use of self-harm threats, apparently used to stop them from leaving him.
Wow. That's That's heavy manipulation,
Yeah.
playing on their fear and empathy, right?
Exactly. It creates this awful trap. And it seems to fit into this alleged pattern of coercion.
Was there more? I read something about money and drugs.
Yes.
Mm.
There were claims he pressured them for money specifically to buy drugs.
Okay, so financial pressure, too.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps most relevant to Olivia's situation, several women testified that he either forced or, pushed them into using cocaine.
Forced or pushed them. Given the cocaine levels found in Olivia, that's incredibly significant, isn't it?
It really is. It links this alleged pattern directly back to the circumstances of her death. You have to ask if that was part of the control.
So let's just quickly recap. We have Olivia's tragic death, the autopsy showing cocaine and strangulation. We have Goodwin's arrest, his alleged statements, the phone data deletion.
Right. And then layered on top of that, these testimonies from other women describing a pattern. Intense affection, control, self-harm threats, pressure for drug money, and coercion around drug use itself.
The consistency is, well, it's chilling.
It really is.
Right.
While every situation is different, these recurring themes paint a very disturbing picture.
So summing up our deep dive into these reports, a terrible death, considerable evidence pointing towards Goodwin, and this wider pattern of alleged abuse reported by multiple women.
And it leaves you with a heavy question, doesn't it? How do we understand these kinds of patterns, and what can they teach us about the dangers that might exist in relationships? Today, we're looking into a really quite disturbing case from the UK. It's about the sentencing of a man named Goodwin.
Yes, and we've got some context here from a UK legal expert, Nick Britt.
Right, exactly. We want to understand, why the judge used such powerful words and what this whole thing might tell us about, well, these intense violent relationships that seem to be an issue over there.
It was a shocking case, really. Goodwin was found to have systematically isolated his victims.
How so? Like cutting them off from people?
Yeah, exactly. Cutting them off from friends, family, their whole support system, basically. And worse, he coerced them into sexual acts.
Force them?
Force them, really, including things like being filmed and even being forced into acts with other men. It's grim stuff.
Wow, okay. And the Crips responded.
Oh, absolutely. Each of the women involved was given a permanent restraining order against him.
Which is understandable. And the actual sentence, I heard it was significant.
It really was, life imprisonment. And the judge set a minimum term of 35 years before he can even be considered for parole.
35 years, minimum.
And that's not all. He also got 3 additional life sentences for the crimes against the other women.
3 more. So how does that work? Does he serve them one after the other?
No, they run concurrently, so at the same time as the main life sentence. But it still underscores the severity, multiple life sentences.
Definitely sends a message. And speaking of messages, the judge's words, they really stood out, didn't they?
He certainly did. Judge Picton called Goodwin a selfish, controlling, sexist man.
Yeah.
And maybe most strikingly, a truly evil person.
Truly evil. You don't often hear that kind of language directly from a judge in sentencing, do you?
Not usually, no. Judges tend towards more formal and objective language, so this was quite pointed.
So why? Why use words like evil? Is it just personal feeling, or is there something more to it?
Well, that's the interesting part. While judges aim for impartiality, language like this can sometimes reflect a broader societal push. A recognition of just how serious these kinds of crimes, coercive control, sexual violence within relationships really are.
Okay. So the judge isn't just talking to Goodwin.
Probably not just to him, no.
Why?
It's likely also a message to the public, saying, look, the courts see this, we understand the harm, and it won't be, swept under the rug. It's being taken extremely seriously.
Right. And this connects to what the expert Nick Britt was saying about this not being a completely isolated type of incident.
Exactly. Britt made the point that, sadly, this kind of thing, these short, intense relationships that turn violent, they're actually a recognized issue in the UK.
A recognized issue. So Goodwin's case, as horrific as it is, fits into a sort of known pattern.
It seems so, yes.
So.
Britt sort of suggested these relationships might flare up quickly, maybe masking deeper problems early on and then escalate dangerously fast. Factors like maybe social isolation or how quickly people form intense bonds now, it's complex.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought. It's not just about one evil person then, but potentially a wider dynamic.
That seems to be the implication, yes. Why do these relationships start intensely and then become so violent? It pushes us to think about bigger societal factors.
And just circling back to the judge's strong words for a second, any potential downside to that? Using terms like evil.
Well, you could argue it risks sounding less impartial, maybe. But in a case like this, with such, extreme harm proven, many would say it's necessary to state the severity plainly. It underscores it for everyone.
Okay, so let's sort of recap. We have Goodwin sentenced to life, minimum 35 years, plus those concurrent life sentences.
Right. And the judge's really strong condemnation, highlighting just how grave the coercive control and sexual violence were.
And then we have the expert insight from Nick Britt, putting this into that wider, troubling context of short, intense, violent relationships in the UK.
Precisely. The judge's words land hard, and the expert view reminds us it's part of a bigger picture that needs attention.
So thinking about that bigger picture, that expert point about these prevalent, short, intense relationships that turn violent, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the societal factors?
Case again, something really jumped out. Their relationship was just so short, less than 3 months, right? And it makes you wonder, does that kind of tragic escalation happen often in such a short time?
Yeah, that's a really important question people ask. And, well, to answer it directly, sadly, yes. It's unfortunately not that uncommon for these very intense but brief relationships to end violently.
Right. It's quite sobering.
It is, and it's actually why, the UK has brought in specific laws targeting controlling or coercive behavior.
Okay.
Yeah, the idea is really to give prosecutors, tools to step in earlier, perhaps when these dangerous patterns first appear, even in short relationships, to try and prevent these awful outcomes.
That makes sense. Trying to get ahead of it.
Yeah.
Now, something else we saw was that Kieran received multiple life sentences. That sounds, well, almost overwhelming, doesn't it? Is that standard practice for multiple serious crimes?
Yes, it actually is pretty standard procedure in these situations. When someone's convicted of several very serious offenses, the court often gives a life sentence for each one.
For each one?
For each one. But, and this is a really key point, they almost always run concurrently at the same time.
Okay. Concurrently, so not one after the other.
Exactly. It's not like he serves, 25 years, then starts another 25. It's more about reflecting the total gravity, the sheer severity of all the crimes committed together.
Right, the weight of it all. Understood. The information also mentioned this term, a tariff, set at 35 years by the judge. What does that mean exactly?
So the tariff, think of it as the absolute minimum time. It's the period the person must spend in prison before they can even be considered for parole.
Just considered.
Just considered, yes. The judge sets it based on the seriousness of the crime, the sentencing guidelines, all of that. So in this case, Kieran is, 33 now? A 35-year tariff means the very earliest point he could possibly be eligible for parole is when he turns 68.
68? Wow. That's a very long time down the road.
A very significant portion of his life, yes.
But like you said, eligible doesn't mean automatic release, right? That's where the parole board steps in.
Precisely. Eligibility just means the process can begin. Parole is definitely not automatic.
So what does the parole board look at then, after those 35 years might be up?
They conduct a really thorough assessment. It's quite comprehensive. They'll look at his behavior during his time in prison.
Okay.
Any rehabilitation programs he's done, has he engaged with them meaningfully? And critically, they evaluate what he says now, his current state of mind, his attitude, and they make an assessment, is he still considered a risk to the public?
So it really comes down to perceived dangerousness, even decades later.
Absolutely. Even after serving that entire 35-year tariff, if the parole board believes he still poses a danger, release will be denied.
He stays incarcerated.
He stays incarcerated. The onus is completely on him to convince the board that he's no longer a threat. It really underscores how the justice system keeps evaluating risk, Public protection remains a central concern long after the initial sentence.
Okay, so let's just pull the threads together from this deep dive. We started with that question about the short relationship, less than 3 months. And sadly, yes, intense short relationships can end in violence, which is why specific laws exist now, like those on coercive control.
That's right. And the multiple life sentences, while sounding dramatic, are standard for multiple serious crimes, but crucially, they run concurrently.
And that tariff, the 35 years here, that's the non-negotiable minimum time before parole eligibility, which for Kieran means potentially age 68.
Correct. But eligibility isn't release. The parole board holds the key. They'll do a deep dive of their own into his behavior, his statements, and crucially, the risk he might still pose.
So no release if they still see him as a danger.
Absolutely not.
It certainly highlights the ongoing complexities, doesn't it? Justice isn't just the sentence, it's also that continuous assessment of risk, potentially for decades, something to think about.
Today we're getting into something pretty critical, the role of the autopsy, especially when a death happens at home.
Right, because, in those private settings, the initial story, so it might not be the complete picture.
Yeah, things aren't always what they seem. People's accounts can be, I guess, misleading.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes unintentionally, sometimes maybe not. And that's where the autopsy steps in. It's like this objective scientific tool.
Okay, so it's doing more than just, finding the immediate cause of death.
Oh, absolutely. Much more. A really thorough postmortem can uncover details that totally flip the script on what you thought happened.
Like what sort of things?
Well, toxicology reports, for one. They show precisely what substances were in the system and, crucially, at what levels.
Mm-hmm.
So that can directly challenge a claim that someone died, say, from natural causes.
Right, if there are unexpected drugs found.
Exactly. Or it might reveal injuries, internal ones even, that weren't obvious or weren't mentioned in the first account.
So let's say someone claims their partner just passed away quietly, but the autopsy finds, I don't know, high levels of a drug they weren't prescribed.
That immediately puts a huge question mark on the initial story. Yeah.
All right,
The physical evidence, it doesn't have an agenda. It just presents facts. And those facts can highlight major discrepancies that need a closer look. It sets a kind of baseline truth.
Got it. Now, something else we looked into was the digital side of things. In the case we examined, the person calling for help was also deleting things, messages, photos, around that same time. Why is that a big deal?
Well, the key thing to grasp there is how the legal system sees actions like that.
Oh, okay.
Deleting things that could be evidence, even if someone thinks they have an innocent reason, it can easily look like an attempt to hide something important about the death.
Mm-hmm.
And that action itself, trying to obstruct the investigation, can actually be a separate crime.
So it's kind of like trying to tidy up a crime scene before the police get there, but digitally.
That's a good way to put it. And the thing is, hitting delete often doesn't make the data truly disappear.
Ah, right. Tech experts can often get it back.
Precisely. Digital forensic specialists have sophisticated tools. They can frequently recover deleted files, messages, photos. So trying to hide information can backfire and end up revealing even more.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift to the courtroom testimony. Several ex-partners spoke. How impactful is that kind of evidence?
That brings us to something called bad character evidence. It's a bit complex legally.
How so?
Generally, you can't just bring up someone's past actions to suggest they must have committed the current crime. That's usually not allowed.
Okay.
But there's an exception. If the prosecution can show a clear, relevant pattern of past behavior that really mirrors the situation in the current case, they can ask the judge to allow it.
And if the judge agrees,
then that evidence can be presented to the jury. The idea is to help them understand the defendant's character and patterns of behavior, not necessarily to prove guilt directly for this crime based on past ones, but to provide context.
So in a case like this, if multiple exes describe a similar pattern maybe, like a really intense start to the relationship, then things becoming very controlling.
Yeah, exactly that kind of thing. If that pattern emerges consistently from different people.
It paints a picture for the jury, even if those earlier relationships didn't end violently.
Precisely. It establishes a mode of operating, a consistent way this individual behaved in intimate relationships. And if that pattern seems to line up with what's alleged to have happened with the person who died, well, it can be very persuasive for the jury.
And looking at this specific case, that pattern, the whirlwind romance turning into control and then tragically escalating, it was quite clear.
Yes, that progression from intense early affection to control and ultimately violence, it's a sadly familiar cycle in these kinds of situations.
So when you piece it all together, the objective findings from the autopsy, the suspicious digital deletions, these testimonies about past behavior, what's the takeaway?
I think it just highlights how complex it is to really uncover the truth, especially in these incredibly sensitive cases where things happen behind closed doors, emotions are high.
Right.
Each piece of evidence is like a different lens.
Right.
The autopsy gives you the stark physical reality. The digital trail can hint at someone's state of mind or intent. And the past relationships, they can shed light on the underlying dynamics.
It really forces you to think about all the different factors, the visible and maybe invisible ones that shape our understanding of what truly happened. Thinking about all that evidence, what other unseen things might influence how we ultimately interpret these tragic events. Today, we're getting into some really tough legal ground. We're looking at what laws apply when someone forces another person into, well, sex acts, or maybe drug use.
That's right. We've got some legal definitions, some explanations to work through.
Yeah, the aim is really to clarify things, to understand the important lines the law draws in these really sensitive areas.
Absolutely.
Mm.
It's vital stuff to understand clearly how the system actually defines and handles these actions.
Okay, so let's start right there. If someone is forced into a sex act, no consent, what are we legally talking about?
Well, if actual sexual penetration is involved and there's no consent, the legal term is rape.
Right.
If it's unwanted sexual contact but not penetration, then the charge is usually sexual assault.
And consent is the absolute core here, isn't it? It has to be freely chosen, voluntary.
Exactly. No question about it.
Now, I know there's also this newer law, coercive control. I think it passed around 2021. How does that fit in?
Ah, yes. The coercive control law is significant because it looks beyond just single incidents. It recognizes a pattern of behavior.
A pattern.
Yeah, like controlling intimidating behavior within a relationship. Forcing someone into sex or drugs might be part of this larger pattern of, well, dominance.
So it's not just seen in isolation.
Precisely. This law lets prosecutors look at that wider context of control, even if maybe not every single act would stand alone as a major crime. It addresses the ongoing abuse.
That makes a lot of sense. Sometimes people might hear about situations like this and think, is that sex trafficking?
That's a really important point to clarify.
So could forcing someone like this, maybe a partner, into a sex act or drug use be seen as trafficking?
Generally, probably not, while both are, frankly, terrible.
Of course.
Sex trafficking usually involves, exploiting multiple people. Often it's organized, forcing people into commercial sex work over a period of time.
Okay, so a different scale and setup.
Exactly. The kind of scenario we're discussing, one person forcing another, perhaps within a relationship, points much more towards domestic abuse.
So it'd be prosecuted under laws for rape, sexual assault.
And now potentially coercive control, yes.
Yep.
The scale and the nature of the exploitation are just different from trafficking as it's commonly understood.
Got it. Okay, let's think about specific tactics. What if someone uses threats, like threatening suicide to control their partner?
Oh, absolutely.
To make them stay, or do things they don't want to, maybe drugs, maybe sex. Does the law count that?
Yes, definitely. Using suicide threats like that, that's a powerful form of emotional manipulation, psychological control.
So it fits under that coercive control idea.
It absolutely does. It's recognized as part of that pattern of coercive behavior. The law is, thankfully, getting better at seeing how damaging that kind of psychological abuse is.
Right, it's not just physical harm.
Not at all.
Okay, now let's switch gears slightly. Imagine the person accused of doing these things, let's call him Goodwin, hypothetically, has a known drug problem, a serious habit.
Could that work as a legal defense? Like, I did this because of my addiction.
Generally speaking, no. A drug habit isn't usually seen as a valid legal excuse for committing crimes as serious as rape or sexual assault.
So it wouldn't just, get him off the hook.
Highly unlikely. I mean, it might be brought up in court, perhaps during sentencing, maybe to give some context to the person's life or situation.
But not to excuse the actual forcing part.
Exactly. It's very unlikely to absolve someone of guilt for the core offense. The legal system tends to hold people responsible for their actions, regardless of substance use issues, in cases this severe.
Are there any situations where addiction is considered more maybe relevant in court?
Well, yes, sometimes, but usually in very different contexts. Think about, say, less severe crimes.
Like what?
Maybe something like petty theft, where someone steals specifically to get money for drugs. In those kinds of cases, a court might consider the addiction as a major factor.
And maybe offer treatment. Yes, maybe offer court-ordered rehab instead of, or alongside, jail time. But, and this is the key thing, when you're talking about violent felonies, rape, sexual assault, murder addiction is almost never accepted as a real defense.
The focus stays on the harm done.
Absolutely. The harm to the victim is paramount, regardless of the perpetrator's struggles with addiction.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap this deep dive then. Forcing sex without consent, that's rape.
Right.
Unwanted sexual contact but no penetration, sexual assault.
Correct.
And these newer coercive control laws are crucial because they address ongoing patterns of abuse, which can include forcing sex or drugs or using emotional manipulation like suicide threats.
Exactly. Captures that broader dynamic.
And importantly, this is usually seen as distinct from sex trafficking, which tends to involve wider exploitation.
A key distinction, yes.
And finally, having a drug habit. It's not a legal get-out-of-jail-free card for these very serious crimes.
Not at all. It might be
Yeah.
context, but it's not an excuse in the eyes of the law for such offenses.
What really stands out is how the law is trying to catch up with the complexities, isn't it? Recognizing power, control, manipulation.
It is. It shows an evolving understanding that coercion isn't just physical. Psychological control is incredibly powerful and damaging.
It really drives home how vital it is for everyone, for you listening, to understand these nuances around consent and control. It's not always obvious, not always physical force. That psychological aspect is so important and increasingly legally recognized. Thanks for walking through this with me.
Of course. Important discussion.
Definitely. Something to think about is how these legal ideas of consent and control apply, or maybe should apply, in situations that aren't necessarily criminal but still involve complex power dynamics. Where do those lines blur? Today, we're looking at coercive control laws based on some recent information.
Right.
And really asking, what can we learn here? Why is this so critical?
Well, the sources, they really hit home, don't they?
They do. It's stark. Too many women die simply because partners can't handle rejection or, losing control.
It's about power.
Exactly. And
Right.
that just highlights why prosecutors absolutely need the right tools, the right laws to step in.
Yeah, tools to address these really dangerous patterns before it's too late. It's not always about physical marks, is it? It's the control.
Precisely. It's that pattern of sort of intimidating and controlling behavior.
Yeah.
The law recognizing that as the offense.
Right, that's the core of coercive control legislation.
So how common are these situations, these deadly abuse cases? The source material is blunt. Very common.
Depressingly so.
Yeah, that's why we have courts just for domestic violence. It's sobering, really.
It is, but it also means there's infrastructure.
True. And there's a message for victims. Victims should know they can call for help.
Crucial.
Police, social workers, and shelters are all ready to assist. People need to hear that, know that these options exist.
Absolutely. Knowing help is there, that you're not isolated, that's incredibly important. These specialized courts, the support systems, they show society is trying to respond.
And these laws, the coercive control laws, they feel like another sort of layer in that response, trying to get in earlier.
Exactly. Intervening in those dynamics before they escalate to the absolute worst outcome.
Okay, so let's talk about the specific case mentioned in the sources. There's a question about whether it could actually change the law. The info suggests, probably not directly, it says, not likely as it's a normal trial.
Right. A standard trial court decision usually doesn't set a wide precedent on its own.
But then it adds, but if an appeal is made, it might set a rule for future cases. Ah, okay.
Yeah, that's where things can shift. Appeals courts interpret the law.
So an appeal could clarify things. How coercive control is applied, maybe?
Precisely. If an appeal court rules on a specific point about the law's interpretation or application, that ruling becomes binding, a precedent for lower courts in similar cases later on. So it could shape things without needing Parliament to, pass a whole new act.
Okay, that makes sense. And even without an appeal, the text notes. At the very least, the sentence sends a strong message.
Definitely. The severity of a sentence, the judge's reasoning, that signals how seriously these crimes are being taken. It has ripple effects.
And speaking of signals, the judge's words in this instance were apparently quite harsh. The source says, it's clear England takes this seriously.
That kind of statement from the bench carries weight.
Yeah, it reinforces that this isn't seen as just, a private matter gone wrong. It's a serious crime.
Exactly. It helps shape that public and legal understanding that coercive control is fundamentally unacceptable and damaging.
And then grounding it all, there's that heartbreaking quote from Olivia's mother, Olivia Wood, calling her daughter, my sunshine, my love, and my heart. It cuts through the legal discussion, doesn't it? Reminds you of the human cost.
It absolutely does. It underscores everything. Why these laws matter, why the support systems matter, why we're even having this conversation. It's about preventing that unbearable loss.
So boiling it down, the key takeaway really seems to be that these coercive control laws, they're a critical piece of the puzzle.
Definitely. For tackling those controlling behaviors that maybe don't leave visible scars but are incredibly dangerous and can, as we see, lead to tragedy.
Right, and it's worth saying again, if you or someone you know is in a situation like this, help is available.
Please reach out. Those resources, police, shelters, social workers, they exist for a reason. You're not alone in this.
Okay, so final thought then. We see the legal system sending strong messages using these laws. It makes you think, doesn't it? How else can we, like, as a society, evolve?
Hmm.
Evolve our attitudes, maybe our legal frameworks even further, not just to react, but to actually prevent coercive control from taking root and destroying lives in the first place. Something to really consider.